Okay, we've actually been through at this point 26 parables, if you're counting. And we'll probably cover we're getting toward the end, we'll cover maybe 7 or 8 more. Today we want to look at 3. I don't know if we'll get to all 3, but what Brother Jackson, at least in his book, classified as preparedness parables. And so we had just begun last week introducing the parable of the barren fig tree over in Luke chapter 13. So let's turn back over there. And you recall at the end of chapter 12, beginning in about verse 54, Jesus kind of scolds the multitudes, the Jews of that day, about their ability to predict the weather, but their inability to interpret the times, that is, the judgment that was about to come upon them, referring to, of course, the Roman armies in AD 70, about 40 years from the time he's talking. And he encourages them there, beginning in verse 57, you need to get your act together. You need to be reconciled to God before this judgment comes. And then you get into 13 and chapter 13, and you recall, as we mentioned last week, if you go to John chapter 9, verse 1, for instance, it wasn't uncommon for the people of that day, and people have had this erroneous belief as far back, as the patriarchs, Job's friends, for instance. But people have entertained this erroneous philosophical or religious belief that, God punishes the wicked. You do bad things happen to you. If you were a good person and doing good things, bad things wouldn't happen to you. Well, we know anybody that's any observer of life at all ought to know that's not true. That the things of this world, the world in which we live, bad things happen to everybody. And good things happen to everybody. And sometimes an evil person can enjoy very good things his whole life and go to his grave feeling, like, hey, I lived a full and happy life and I had everything I wanted. I was, the head of a drug cartel and I killed everybody I wanted to and I had gazillions of dollars, and so good for me. Well, unfortunately, there is a reckoning for everybody. For him, that kind of person. But bad things happen to good people. And that, of course, in the apologetic world, we call that the problem of evil, pain, and suffering. That's always been the atheists' primary go-to argument for their inability to believe in the God of the Bible, because the argument is, well, if God is all-powerful but evil exists, then he's not all good, or he'd get rid of it. It's very oversimplification of God's purposes. Or, if he's all good, all benevolent, and there's evil, then he's not all powerful. He doesn't have the power to get rid of it. Well, those are bad arguments. And we don't have time to get into that. But the bottom line is, in John 9, verse 1, the disciple said, who sinned, this man or his parents? That he was born blind. Well, that's kind of a silly question. Really? You think this guy sinned to be born blind? And so these people come to him with this same idea at the beginning of 13. There were present at that season some who told him about these Galileans that Pilate had actually slaughtered right there in the middle of them offering their sacrifices, and their blood was mingled with the blood of the animals. And Jesus responds, after warning them about judgment to come there at the end of chapter 12, do you suppose that these Galileans were worse than anybody else just because this came upon them, that they were worse than anybody else? No, I tell you, except you repent, you'll perish. Or what about, and then he brings up another episode apparently that had happened recently in that area that everybody knew about. This tower in Siloam fell and killed 18 people. Do you think those people were worse than anybody else just because they suffered that event? It's kind of like saying, do you think just because some jetliner crashed and killed everybody on board that those people were worse than anybody else? No. That's called gravity and other laws of nature. And so he says, no, you'll perish. So he speaks this parable. A certain man had a fig tree planted in his vineyard, and he came seeking fruit on it and found none. Then he said to the keeper of his vineyard, look, for 3 years I've come seeking fruit on this fig tree and find none. Cut it down. Why does it use up the ground? It's wasting the space. It's taking up space, using up nutrients that could be used for others. But he answered and said, Sir, let it alone this year also, until I dig around it and fertilize it. And if it bears fruit, well, but if not, after that, you can cut it down. Now this parable this probably was, I don't know if a shock, but to these people he was talking to. This parable is, now we're going to draw some lessons for us from it, but this parable was spoken directly to who? He's just warned them about the signs of the times and how they need to get right with God because of the coming judgment. And I don't mean the final judgment. I'm talking about God's judgment upon the Jewish commonwealth with the Roman armies. So what is he saying? Who's he talking to here? This barren fig tree. Who is this barren fig tree? Yeah, it's the Jews. It's the Jewish nation. I mean, God had borne with these people over the centuries. Now, the fig tree in ancient Palestine was the most important tree. Apparently, it yielded crops throughout the year, at least 3, maybe more, and also valued for its shade. It wasn't a huge tree, but very dense. And it's interesting, the fig tree was recognized as a symbol of peace and prosperity. Remember 1 Kings 4:25? During the time of Solomon, what did the Bible say about the people during Solomon's reign, and especially at the beginning of his reign? It said, Judah and Israel dwelt in safety from Dan to Beersheba, every man under what? Every man under his vine and under his fig tree. So a symbol of peace and prosperity, to dwell under your vine and fig tree. It's interesting to me too. It wasn't just the Jewish culture that looked at the fig tree this way. Look over at 2 Kings, and you see a foreign Gentile ruler, an Assyrian by the name of Sennacherib, who is besieging Jerusalem. And notice what his representative says. Look down in about verse 31, during the days of Hezekiah. 18. 2 Kings 18. Look at verse 29. Thus says the king, do not let Hezekiah deceive you. He won't be able to deliver you, nor let Hezekiah make you trust in the Lord. Verse 31, do not listen to Hezekiah, for thus says the king of Assyria, make peace with me by a present. Come out to me, and every one of you eat from his own vine, and every one what? From his own fig tree. And every one of you drink the waters of his own cistern until, of course, there's the catch, until I come and take you away somewhere else. And by the way, when the Assyrians took you away somewhere, how'd they take you generally? Not just chains. Hooks through your nose, your mouth. That's how they carried their captives back to Assyria, with hooks. In fact, God in his prophecy through Isaiah to Hezekiah says, you know what I'm going to do to Sennacherib? I'm going to turn him around and take him back home. I'm going to put a hook in his mouth, figuratively speaking. The reason he said that was because that's the way they carried their captives around. He said, I'm gonna pull him back, yank him by a hook back home, and then he'll die worshiping his own God. And you know, the interesting thing about God is, you know, you're talking about a being that spans all eternity. Now, you have to be careful when you read the scriptures, because you read that and you think what? You think that God's going to make, when Sennacherib gets home, what's going to happen the next day? He's going to go into his temple of Nisroch, his god, and be worshiping, and he's going to be murdered, right? That's the way we read it, because we're finite people and we live in terms of minutes and days and years, and none of that matters to God. And so really what happened was, after Jesus, after the second member of the Godhead, the messenger of Jehovah, killed 185,000 people in one night, his soldiers, and so he turns tail and goes back home. Do you know how many years later it was before his sons killed him while he was worshiping in his temple? 17 years. 17 years before that prophecy was fulfilled. But that's because you're dealing with an eternal God who doesn't dwell within time. He does things on his own time and with his own timing. So we've got this fig tree that's either planted in a choice spot in a vineyard, or I'm told by some commentators that this word translated vineyard in the Greek is broad enough to include orchards as well. So it could have been in an orchard. But at any rate, this guy comes each year looking for fruit. Now, according to Leviticus 19, when the Israelites planted a fig tree or they moved into the land, there were a certain number of years that the tree had to be clean before they could use the fruit off of it. 3, I believe. So most likely then, this is years 4, 5, and 6. He should have been able to come, and incidentally, if this thing is, if it's rendering a crop at least 3 times a year or more, he's not just coming once a year looking for the fruit. He's probably coming several times, and he's not finding what he's looking for. So the man represents who when it comes to the Jewish nation? The man that comes looking for fruit on his fig tree. The fig tree is who? It's the nation of Israel. The man that's looking for fruit is who? It's God. And many commentators believe, and I don't think it's a stretch to say, that this person in the parable, the husbandman, the keeper of the vineyard, who says, well, wait a minute, give it some time, let me work with it, is very possibly representing who? Christ. Christ believes in us, and he believes in people. And the only reason this world stands, that he doesn't come back, is according to 2 Peter 3 verse 9, what? He's not slack concerning his promise. What promise? His promise to come back, judge the world, but is long-suffering, patient, not wishing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. So he's our champion. He believes in us. You know, go to Mark 16:7. When Jesus rose from the dead and he said, go and tell, he was going to tell his disciples that he goes into Galilee. Come meet me. Anybody remember what exactly he said in Mark 16 verse 7? Go and tell who? Go and tell my disciples and Peter, I'm going into Galilee. Because he was looking to redeem Peter. Well, go to Isaiah 5:4, and God says what about his vineyard? What question does he ask about the Israelites and their behavior over 1,500 years? And it wasn't 1,500 years in Isaiah's day, but it was about half that period. He said what? Yeah, he said, and he said, what more could I have done? What more could I have done for this people? And yet he sends his prophets and they kill them. He sends John the Baptizer. They kill him. This is their last chance. Christ is it. They rejected him. They rejected his Holy Spirit, preaching the gospel through his apostles. And as John the Baptizer said in Matthew 3:10, the axe lies at the root of the trees. Yeah.
I can't help but think too about the conversation between God and Abraham before the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah.
Yeah.
Same concept.
Same concept. I mean, he does not, God doesn't, you remember when you were in high school, you studied Milton's poem, this idea of this vengeful God. It's like he just enjoys, he doesn't. And he says it over and over. I don't delight in the death of the wicked. And as Dave just pointed out, I mean, Abraham says, oh, you're going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. What if there's 50 righteous people there? You wouldn't do that. Well, no, I won't do that. And then he just keeps going down and down and down. And 10 people. He couldn't find 10 people in that city. He didn't want to destroy it. That's not his nature. But he said, I've done all I can do for these people. And I'm going to give you one more chance. And this is it, though. So that is obviously the thrust of the parable. It's about the Jewish nation and their rejection over the centuries of God and his messengers, and it culminates in their murder of his son. But that doesn't mean there's not lessons in here for us, right? So let's look at a few. The fig tree is described as what? What's it called? What did I call it? The parable of the what? The barren fig tree. What does that mean it's barren? Well, it's got no fruit on it, which means what? It's not doing the job of a fig tree, right? I mean, what's your job, fig tree? You got one job. What is it? Bear some figs. So it's useless. Well, unfortunately, there are people in the church that are useless. I hate to put it that way. They're not wicked. They're not lawbreakers. They're not violent. They're not hateful. But they're not useful. They don't do anything. We're supposed to be the salt of the earth, the light of the world. You go to those parables in Matthew 25 and we see that people are condemned not because of things they've done wrong, but people are condemned for what? Things they didn't do. Things we didn't do. Things we left undone. We should have been doing. And again, as we've talked about before, he's not looking for the impossible, the extraordinary, the sensational. He's just looking for some fruit. And fruit and fig trees are supposed to bear fruit. Christians are supposed to bear what? Fruit, right? But here's the thing. Not only was it not bearing fruit, but what else does he say here it was doing? I mean, what was it preventing? I mean, yeah, but isn't it using up some ground and some nutrients and resources that maybe some other plant could have been using? So it's not only not producing, but it's actually using up. We call that a what? In the animal and plant world. A parasite. They just use, they don't give. You know anybody like that? Know anybody like that in the church? Now, they're not going to get involved in some program, but man, they can tell you what's wrong with it. How it could be better. I mean, this fig tree, it says, is using up the ground, wasting space, keeping it from others. Did the Jews have that problem? You go to Romans, they prevented, actually, Paul says, the Gentiles. Caused the Gentiles to blaspheme because of their behavior. I don't know. There's people in here a lot older than me. And I realize that the problems of this world, they've been around for a long time. It's nothing new. But I think that by and large, those of you that are older in here probably would say that if you had to look back at your childhood growing up, there's a lot more parasites in society than there now than there were then. I mean, people just living off other people, sucking up whatever they can and not contributing much. I heard a discussion the other day, not to get political, but I don't care. Doesn't bother me. People get mad, get mad. The Bible applies to everything. There's nothing in God's Word, the principles that don't apply to anything going on in this world. I heard somebody talking the other day about community organizers, professional community organizers, about these people who make a living basically now being paid by left-wing billionaires to protest. They just bust them all over. They just go from here and there to protest and riot, and that's their full-time job. There's nothing productive about that. It is all parasitic. And we got plenty of people like that. I mean, every day I drive around the city, and it's not just here, it's everywhere, but I see people standing in intersections, want me to give them money. Well, I don't have a problem giving people money that need it. And sometimes you'll see people that look like, man, they could use it. But there's many a time I go by an intersection and there's some able-bodied guy with decent clothes on and brand new tennis shoes, and he's got him a sign that says, you know, I'm in need, give me some money. Well, you don't look like it.
And he has his cell phone too.
Yeah, he's got his cell phone because more than likely, my understanding is he's been dropped off there by somebody that organizes these people, gets a slice or a cut. Parasites. They're everywhere. You know, we try to fumigate them in nature. So, being fruitless, there was only one thing left for this tree, and that was destruction, right? Cut it down. Matthew 7:19, every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. John 15:6, if a man does not abide in me, he's cast forth as a branch and withers, and the branches are gathered, thrown into the fire and burned. Right? You know, if you get cut down, if I get cut down, it's nobody's fault but our own if we don't bear fruit. Churches that don't bear fruit, they kind of die on the vine. But I guess the encouraging thing about this parable is the tolerant owner. Look at his patience. I mean, he came several years looking for fruit, probably several times a year, month after month. Long suffering, slow to anger, as I said, 2 Peter 3:9, not wishing that any 3:9, not wishing that any should perish. But even with God, as patient as he is, and he's a lot more patient than we are with other people. We're a lot more patient with he's a lot more patient with other people than we are. He's a lot more patient with us than we are with ourselves. But even as patient as God is, what? There's still a limit. And his patience can be exhausted. And it will be exhausted. And for the Jewish nation, this was their last chance when they rejected his son. But the same is for us. His patience can be exhausted, and it will be at some point. We want to know how long the world is going to be here? Well, it's an easy answer, right? The world's going to be around until God's patience is exhausted. Now, I don't know when that is, but it's going to happen.
Can you imagine being patient and being omniscient at the same time? That's one of the amazing things.
Yeah. I mean, it is amazing the fact that Dave's talking about his omniscience, the fact that he knows everything. I mean, he's patient with a lot of stuff. A lot more than we are, you know. He knows everything that's going on, everything that's ever gone on, everything that ever will go on. Nothing surprises him. The interesting thing about God's attributes, of course, is we have to separate them out to try to talk about them, understand them. But they really all, you know, you talk about his knowing everything. Well, you can't separate that from his being everywhere at the same time. And you can't separate that from his eternal nature, spanning all dimensions at all times. See, that's how come he knows everything that ever has happened or ever will happen. Because he's already there. And just like I've said before, if I want to examine that pin on Jerry's coat, what do I got to do? I have to physically get closer to look at it. See, God doesn't, you know, there's phrases in the Bible like, you know, he came down to check. He doesn't come down anywhere. He doesn't move closer to anything. Right? He's already there. I think Chisholm said that. I think John Wayne said that in that movie. What was it? His sidekick. What was the guy's name? Ben. What was the guy playing all those movies with him? He was originally a rodeo stuntman. Come on, y'all are. There's my John Wayne people in here. Anyway, huh? I said John Wayne. He was playing Chisholm. You've never seen the movie Chisholm? Well, then you're lacking in a lot of education. You need to go to the library, or you need to get on the streaming service and watch all the old John Wayne westerns, and you'll catch up, okay? All right, so he says something about, the guy says something about, you know, there's no law west of the Pecos or something like that. And at the end of the movie, John Wayne says, wrong, Mr. whatever your name is. He said, wherever men go, they find the law, and they find that God's already been there. I mean, that's the way it is. Wherever we go, he's already been. Well, let's look at the unjust steward, Luke chapter 16. Another parable on preparedness. It's interesting, it comes right after in the same context as the prodigal son. It's connected. He also said, the Bible says, some translations say, and. Now, this is one of these parables that really gets people flummoxed. Wondering if Christ is, what's God trying to say here? What's he trying to, what particular characteristic is he trying to promote? But really all it gets down to is he's warning against the love of money, but with a special emphasis on using the material things that we have in preparation for eternity, knowing that we're going to have to answer for how we use the things with which we've been entrusted. And if you've been entrusted with something, that makes you a what? A steward, right? Well, when it gets down to it, everything in this building, even though there's a deed in the registrar's office that says this property belongs to a nonprofit corporation by the name of Forest Hill Church of Christ, Inc. Really, this building belongs, and the ground under it belongs to who? God. I mean, there's nothing in this universe that doesn't belong to Him. I was at years ago, I went to one of these, back when the Faulkner-Burkeen marriage seminars were real popular. And I went to a couple of them. And I'm thinking that Faulkner was the funny one. And he was telling the story about the time, he was trying to talk about his attitude, changing his attitude toward the things of this world. And, somebody backed into his van or hit him, and, the temptation is to what? I mean, get upset, right? Get mad, get angry. And he said, I just had to stop and think for a minute. And he said, I just said to myself, he said, Lord, this is a perfectly good van, but it's your van. And if you don't have a problem with somebody else messing it up and denting it, then I can handle it. Well, he's right. Everything we have belongs to God. And so there's some stewardship principles here when we start talking about being prepared. So he said to his disciples, there was a certain rich man who had a steward. And an accusation was brought to him that this man was wasting his goods. He was stealing, he was pilfering. Of course, God is the rich man. He owns everything. This is one of his children, one of his people, his steward. The steward most likely a slave who was promoted to this position. So he called him and said, now see, we're all going to be called to give an account. As somebody says, if you're a CPA, there's going to be a final audit. What is this I hear about you? Give an account of your stewardship, for you can no longer be steward. Then the steward said within himself, what shall I do? For my master is taking the stewardship away from me. Now you got to love this. I cannot dig. Well, you can probably put in parentheses, I'm lazy. I can't do manual labor. I am ashamed to beg, put in parentheses, although I'm not ashamed to steal from my master. I have resolved what to do, that when I am put out of the stewardship, they may receive me into their houses. So I'm going to make some friends, and here's how I'm going to do it. He called every one of his master's debtors to him and said to the first, how much do you owe my master? And he said, 100 measures of oil, probably, depending on what you read, 500 to 800 gallons. It's worth a lot of money. So he said to him, take your bill and sit down quickly and write 50. Let's cut that in half. Then he said to another, how much do you owe? And so he said, 100 measures of wheat, maybe 800 bushels. And he said to him, take your bill and write 80. We'll cut you a deal, 20%. So the master commended the unjust steward. Now notice he's commending an unjust steward. That's the problem that some people have with the parable. But that's because they push it too far. You got to see what the point is that's being made. So the master commended the unjust steward because he had dealt shrewdly. There's the point. For the sons of this world are more shrewd in their generation than the sons of light. And I say to you, make friends for yourselves by unrighteous mammon, that when you fail, they may receive you into an everlasting home. He who is faithful in what is least is faithful also in much, and he who is unjust in what is least is unjust also in much. Therefore, if you've not been found faithful in the unrighteous mammon, who will commit to your trust the true riches? And if you will not be faithful in what is another man's, who will give you what is your own? No servant can serve two masters. See, they had slaves back then. If you were a slave, you belonged to one person. For either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will be loyal to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. Mammon, a word meaning what? Money, riches, wealth. Okay. So, I've read different commentators on this, and I don't think you have to push it. Now, some will say, well, see, the customers, the debtors, they were in on this. Everybody in here is a rascal, right? They were more than willing to take part in this scheme to defraud the master. And even the master's obviously a little on the bent side. You know, he was probably kind of grinning and winking and said, "Oh, that was a pretty good one there," you know, because that's the way he is. I don't read it that way at all. You can read it that way, but I don't see why these debtors, these customers, I mean, if the steward comes to him who's in charge of the master's affairs and says, "Hey, we're going to give you a deal. If you'll pay me now and pay this much, you'll be done." Okay, yeah, I would take that deal. Sure. And I don't know that the master has necessarily to be a rascal in order to congratulate this guy on his behavior, because it wasn't necessarily on his behavior, but his foresight and his preparation is the point, and getting ready for what was about to come. And so, you know, I don't think you read too much into the details here, because after all, as we've talked about before, there's generally one central truth we're looking at. And some have looked at this unrighteous mammon, meaning, oh, you know, money's bad, or this is talking about ill-gotten gains. Well, I don't see that either. How do I know what the definition is of unrighteous mammon? Where would I look here in this passage? Look at verse 11. And look what it's compared to. If you have not been faithful in the unrighteous mammon, what? Who will commit to your trust what? The true riches. So really what we're contrasting here is, on the one hand, I've got the true riches, the things that are eternal, the things that will last, the things that are certain. On the other hand, I've got the unrighteous mammon, things that aren't certain, things that don't last, things that you should not put your trust in. Not that you can't use them. So, this guy, he makes a deal with the debtors, and he's commended for his foresight. And so, if we're going to be entrusted with the true riches, we have to prove our stewardship as well. I mean, this guy, he says, and here's the contrast. Look at the difference of the way people in the world go after what they want with compared to Christians who know what's really important. Right? The way people go after physical and material possessions. I like what Trench said. He's a commentator. Summarizes the point of the parable as this: Christians bestow less pains to win heaven than the children of this world bestow to win earth. They are less provident in heavenly things than those are in earthly, and the world is better served by its servants than God is by His. And I mean, that's really the lesson of the parable. People of this world will spend a lot more energy on getting things of this world than many times we as Christians do on getting eternal things. And so the question is, do we spend our energy going after the true riches? Are we as diligent as they are when they go after things of this world and the way they pursue their ambitions? I mean, let's think about it for a minute. Here's just one example. I turned on the TV yesterday on the British Open because I wanted to see who was winning and how the tournament was going. And you look at these guys, top whatever in the world, Scotty Scheffler's number one, and you got all these great golfers. Now, how much time do you think they've spent on their craft to get where they are? Think about the time they spend just on a single tournament. What do they do before each tournament? Tournaments are Thursday to Sunday. What are professional golfers? When do they get there? Generally. Usually Monday. And what do? They play the course. Usually more than once. What are they doing? They got to see, each hole and how it plays, whether it's the fairways, the bunkers, the greens. They're checking it out. And so is their caddy. He's with them too, taking notes. And they're going through this thing more than once. And then when he's not on the course, he's on the practice tee or the practice green. I mean, you look at the preparation they make for a golf tournament. The diligence, the preparation. That's just one little example. And we can look at money different ways. Some people look at money and just say it's an enemy. I don't think it's an enemy. It can be our friend, but it cannot be our what? Our master. Well, we'll pick up here next week. And we'll finish the unjust steward and look at one or two others.